Why was everyone laughing before she even walked into the room? Maybe it was the way rumors spread faster than orders on a base like Coronado. Maybe it was the word woman whispered among men who had forgotten what silence meant. Whatever it was, the laughter carried down the steel hallways that morning, sharp, careless, and echoing off the walls like mockery disguised as humor. The briefing room smelled of salt and metal, the Pacific wind cutting through the open vents. The Navy SEALs had gathered before sunrise, voices rough with caffeine and arrogance. They joked about the cold, about the training ahead, about the rumor that someone new was joining the Advanced Tactics Evaluation Unit, the team reserved for operators who had already seen hell and still wanted to walk back in. But when she walked in, everything changed. No one knew her name then. No one had to. The room fell quiet, like sound itself took a step back to make space for something it couldn't define. She wasn't tall. She wasn't the type to draw attention. Her presence didn't demand respect, it created it quietly, patiently. Her uniform was pressed, her boots clean, her hair tied tight under the cap, every movement measured, controlled, like a shadow that had learned to live among men of noise. At the far end of the room sat Admiral Hartwell, 20 years in uniform, a man carved from command and combat. His hands were scarred from the kind of work that never made the news. His eyes carried the kind of calm you only earn when you've seen the worst in people and still choose to lead them. He leaned back in his chair, half smiling. "So," he said, voice low but carrying weight, "you must be the one the rumors are about." The room chuckled, the sound of men enjoying what they thought was harmless fun. She stood at attention, eyes locked forward. "Tell me," the Admiral said, raising an eyebrow, "what's your call sign?" It was meant as a joke. A little icebreaker. A test of confidence. She didn't blink, didn't hesitate. "Night Fox, sir." The words landed like a stone in still water. The laughter stopped almost immediately, as if something unseen had cut the air in half. "Night Fox," the Admiral repeated, amused. "That sounds like something out of a comic book." But her eyes didn't waver, and in that silence, in that simple, quiet defiance, something in him changed. It wasn't fear, it wasn't intimidation, it was recognition. He'd seen soldiers like her before, the kind that didn't need to prove themselves with volume, the kind that didn't break when the mission went wrong, the kind that carried ghosts in silence. "All right, Night Fox," he said finally, his grin fading into something more respectful. "Let's see if you can run with the wolves." The next morning, the training began before the sun had even climbed the horizon. The Pacific was black glass, the cold slicing through skin like knives. The instructors barked orders. Men cursed, stumbled, pushed themselves to the edge. It was the kind of training that stripped you down to what was real, the body breaking, the mind begging to stop, pride evaporating in salt water and mud. And through it all, she didn't falter. When they swam across the freezing ocean, she was the first one out of the water. When they carried logs on their shoulders until arms trembled and backs bled, she took the heaviest one and never asked for help. When they crawled under barbed wire with live rounds overhead, she didn't flinch once. By the third day, the men had stopped making jokes. They whispered instead. "She doesn't talk. She doesn't eat. She just works." But at night, when the others collapsed in exhaustion, muscles screaming, spirits cracking, she sat alone by the shoreline. The waves touched her boots and she'd stare at the horizon, motionless. No one knew what she was thinking. No one dared ask. But something about that silence unsettled them. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't mystery for effect. It was the kind of quiet you only earn when you've survived something no one else has. One evening, Admiral Hartwell called his senior instructors into his office. The room smelled of coffee and salt. A single lamp cast light over classified files stacked across his desk. "What's the story with her?" he asked. "Sir, we don't know much. one of them said. "Her files restricted above our clearance." "Above yours," the Admiral frowned. "Above mine." "Yes, sir." That made him pause. Clearances didn't go higher than his, not unless she was attached to something black, buried in operations even admirals weren't supposed to see. The next day, he decided to find out for himself who she really was. They were running close-quarters combat drills. The sun was low, shadows long across the sand. When her turn came, he stepped into the ring himself. "Let's see what you've got, Night Fox," he said, rolling his shoulders. The men grinned, waiting to see her fail. The whistle blew, and in less than 2 seconds she moved. A shift of weight, a drop of stance, a pivot, and the Admiral was on the ground. Her knee pinned his arm. His wrist was locked in an angle that promised pain if he resisted. He froze, she held, her breathing calm, steady, unshaken. When she released him, she stepped back without a word. The room was silent. Not a laugh, not a smirk, just the sound of the ocean behind them and the faint hum of the wind. The Admiral stood slowly, brushing the dust off his uniform. He didn't speak either. But something in his eyes had changed, a flicker of respect that no medal could earn. That night the men didn't whisper jokes, they whispered her name. During the next phase of training, the team ran a live-fire hostage rescue simulation in the Mojave, explosions tearing through sand, smoke turning the air thick and choking. Midway through the drill, a helicopter malfunctioned, its rotor grinding, systems failing. The team was stranded, communication scrambled. Panic began to bleed into the comms. Then her voice came through. Calm, precise, almost emotionless. "Team Bravo, move to Sector 2. Cover fire on my mark. 1, 2, now." Every movement after that was perfect. No shouting, no hesitation. Just execution. 15 minutes later, the mission was complete, everyone accounted for. Even the instructors had nothing to say. When they returned to base, the Admiral waited for her near the hangar doors, the ocean wind carrying the last of the day's dust across the tarmac. "You led that mission like you'd done it 100 times, he said quietly. "I have, sir." He studied her face, calm, distant, the kind of calm that doesn't come from confidence but from repetition, from doing things that don't let you sleep at night. It hit him then, she wasn't a trainee. She wasn't there to learn. She was there to remember. 2 days later, a helicopter with no markings landed on base. 2 men in black suits stepped out, both wearing the kind of expressions that didn't belong to soldiers, but to people who gave orders others couldn't refuse. They asked for her by name. The Admiral met them at the gate. "She's under my command," he said. "Not anymore," one of them replied. "Her orders come from higher up." That night she was gone. Her bunk spotless, her locker empty. The only thing left was a folded note placed neatly on her bed. The Admiral picked it up. The handwriting was small, deliberate. "Sir, thank you for the chance to remember what silence feels like. Night Fox." He read it twice before setting it down. Something in his chest tightened, not pride, not loss, something in between. In the days that followed, the base returned to normal. The laughter returned. The drills continued. But sometimes, late at night, the Admiral would find himself standing outside that empty bunk, staring at the unmade sheets, wondering where she'd gone. Some said she'd been reassigned. Others said she'd never existed in the system at all. But the Admiral knew better. Because silence like that doesn't vanish. It only moves from one mission to another, one shadow to the next. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of ordinary war, the woman they called Night Fox was already walking into darkness again, for someone else's dawn. Where did she go? No one knew. No transport logs, no mission briefs, not even a whisper in the dark channels that usually leaked everything. Night Fox had simply vanished. For weeks, Admiral Hartwell carried on as if nothing had changed. But something in his routine did. Every time he passed the training yard, his eyes drifted to the shoreline beyond the fence, that quiet strip of sand where she used to sit alone. He found himself listening for something that wasn't there anymore, that calm stillness, the kind that made chaos behave. Then one night, the phone on his desk rang, the kind of ring that didn't belong to normal hours. "Admiral Hartwell," he answered. The voice on the other end was clipped official. "Sir, this line is secure." "It is." "We have a situation. Covert team behind enemy lines requesting immediate extraction. The mission code," the man hesitated, "is Night Fox." The Admiral froze. He hadn't heard that name in months. "She's alive," he said quietly. "Yes, sir, and she's leading them." There was silence, long, heavy, like the weight of something that shouldn't have been possible. Hartwell stared out the window, the base lights shimmering against the ocean. "Get her home," he said. His voice barely carried, but it was an order. Get her home. Hours bled into days. The operation was sealed from public channels, scrubbed from reports. Whatever Night Fox was doing, it was happening deep inside territory that didn't exist on official maps. Rumors spread. Some said she was leading a counterintelligence team. Others whispered about hostages, Americans taken during a failed recon. No one knew for sure. But somewhere out there, Night Fox was moving through darkness, the kind of darkness where names stop mattering and only instincts keep you breathing. The mission was called Silent Echo. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, it was the kind of operation that governments deny until the medals show up years later, long after the funerals. Night Fox and her small unit, 6 men, 1 medic, 1 pilot, were inserted in the borderlands of a failed state, their objective clear: rescue 10 civilian contractors taken hostage by a rogue paramilitary group. They were dropped at night, the helicopter low, rotors slicing the humid air. The ground below was a wasteland, jungle turned to ruin, villages burned, roads swallowed by mud. When the bird lifted off again, they were alone. "Comms check," said the sergeant beside her, his voice low. "Fox 1 clear," she replied. Her tone carried no fear, no hesitation, just focus. They moved through the jungle single file, every step calculated. She led the way. Her eyes cut through darkness as if she'd memorized the path in another life. Hours passed before they reached the outskirts of a ruined compound. The sound of distant generators hummed like a heartbeat in the dark. Through her scope, she could see shapes, armed men, patrol lights sweeping the yard, the faint outline of a cage near the center. 10 hostages, she whispered. 5 guards outside, 3 more near the gate, wait for the pattern. She watched, counted breaths, footsteps, rhythm. Then quietly into her mic, "Now." Silencers hissed. 2 guards dropped before they even knew they were under attack. Another turned too late. Within 30 seconds, the outer ring was clear. The team moved in. Inside the compound, the air was thick with smoke and the stench of diesel. The hostages were huddled behind steel bars, eyes wide, faces pale under flickering light. "U.S. Navy," she said softly as she approached, "we're getting you out." One of the captives began to cry, his voice shaking. "We thought you'd forgotten us." She didn't answer. She just smiled faintly, that quiet, steady kind of smile that meant you're safe now. But missions like these never go clean. As they cut the locks, an alarm blared, high-pitched, mechanical, desperate. The compound erupted in gunfire. Bullets tore through metal and concrete. "Contact East Tower," shouted the medic. "Fox 2, cover the evac." Her voice never rose. Even in chaos, she sounded composed. The firefight lasted minutes that felt like hours. Dirt and smoke turned the night into a blur of motion and noise. She moved like a phantom, calm under pressure, calculating angles, timing reloads by instinct. But then in the haze, she saw something movement by the wreckage of an armored truck. A child, small, terrified, running into open ground. She didn't think, she just moved. A burst of gunfire cracked through the air, striking the ground inches from the boy. She sprinted forward, tackled him down, shielding him with her own body. A round grazed her shoulder, another struck her vest. Pain flashed white across her vision, but she held him tighter. "Stay down," she whispered. "Fox, you're hit," her sergeant called. "I'm fine, move the civilians." She pushed herself up, blood seeping through her sleeve. The boy clung to her leg as the team secured the last of the hostages. "Chopper inbound," someone yelled through comms. The evac bird descended through the smoke, kicking up debris and dust. One by one, the civilians were loaded aboard. The child went last, his small hand gripping hers until the final second. When the last man climbed on, she turned back toward the jungle, scanning for her team. "Where's the pilot?" she asked. "Still at the down recon site, 2 clicks north." Her mind snapped into clarity. 10 hostages were supposed to be extracted, not 9. She looked at the helicopter, its door gunner shouting for her to get in. She didn't move. "Go," she ordered. "I'll bring him." "Fox, that's suicide." "Go," she repeated, louder this time. The chopper lifted off, leaving her in a swirl of smoke and dust. And then there was silence again. She ran through the jungle, bleeding, alone, the night pressing in around her. Her breath came in steady bursts, pain pulsing in her arm. She followed the sound of distant gunfire until she found him, the pilot, trapped behind an overturned vehicle, pinned down by 2 hostiles. She crouched behind cover, counted the seconds, then moved. 2 shots. 2 bodies fell. The pilot looked up, dazed, disbelief in his eyes. They said no one was coming. She extended her hand. They were wrong. He took it, his grip trembling. Together they moved back toward the extraction zone, ducking under branches, stumbling through mud. By the time they reached the ridge, the evac chopper had already turned back, circling once more like a ghost that refused to leave her behind. Flares lit the sky, the rope dropped. She pushed the pilot up first, then hooked her harness. The helicopter began to rise. Below, the jungle burned. The sound of distant gunfire faded into the rhythm of rotor blades, heavy, relentless. For a moment she looked down at the flames, at the darkness swallowing them, and thought of the shoreline back home. Of peace, if such a thing even existed for people like her. When the chopper finally touched down at the forward base, dawn was breaking. The light hit her face, streaked with dirt and blood, but her expression never changed. The pilot she'd rescued turned to her, still shaking. "You saved us," he said quietly. She nodded once. 10 hostages, she corrected, not 9. He blinked, confused for a moment, then realized she was counting him. Back at Coronado, Admiral Hartwell stood by the landing pad as the helicopter touched down. He had been waiting for hours. When she stepped off the bird, the air itself seemed to pause. Her uniform was torn, the blood on her sleeve dry, her boots caked in mud. But her eyes, those were the same, steady, cold silver under the rising sun. The guards at the gates saluted her, without being told to. The Admiral stepped forward. "Welcome home, Night Fox." She nodded. "Mission complete, sir." He studied her for a long moment, the quiet strength in her posture, the exhaustion buried behind calm eyes. "You saved 9 hostages, didn't you?" he asked. 10, sir," she said softly. "You forgot the pilot." Something in his chest tightened again. He smiled faintly. "You always see what others miss." She didn't answer. Just a small nod, then she walked past him, disappearing into the barracks. Later that morning, the SEALs gathered for briefing. The Admiral stepped up to the front, holding her report in one hand. "I once asked her call sign as a joke," he said. "Now you know why they call her Night Fox." The room was silent. She doesn't speak much, he continued, voice low, thoughtful. Because her silence commands more respect than our words ever could. Strength isn't about how loud you are. It's about what you do when no one believes in you. No applause followed, no cheers, just quiet reflection, the kind that lingers longer than sound. And outside, beyond the glass walls, the ocean shimmered, the same horizon where Night Fox used to sit alone, listening to the waves. No one saw her there again. But the Admiral knew she was still out there, somewhere, in another mission no one would ever read about, guarding the kind of peace that never makes the news. Because some warriors don't fight for glory. They fight for silence. And silence, when it belongs to the right kind of soul, can command a world to listen. Why did she never speak of her past? Because silence was safer than truth. It wasn't always that way. Once, before the name Night Fox carried weight in rooms full of men with stars on their shoulders, she had another name, the one written on her academy badge, the one her mother used when she whispered prayers before deployment. Lieutenant Alexandra Reeve. Back then she'd believed in simple things, that loyalty meant safety, that courage meant being loud, that good people always came home. But life and war had other definitions. Years before Coronado, she was a pilot, one of the youngest in her squadron. Fast reflexes, clean records, and a quiet sort of brilliance that made her instructors wonder if she ever got scared. She did. She just never let it show. Her call sign then wasn't Night Fox, it was Echo. Because she was the one who never spoke first, only responded, only mirrored. She flew reconnaissance missions over conflict zones most people couldn't pronounce. Skimming through valleys at dawn, her jet slicing air so low she could see her reflection on rivers that cut through jungle and ruin. But it wasn't flying that made her famous inside her small circle. It was her control, that rare ability to stay calm even when everything around her burned. Until one night, that control shattered. It was supposed to be a routine overwatch. A convoy extraction, 10 vehicles, 4 armored, 2 air supports, and her team orbiting high above in silent cover. But something went wrong. They didn't see the heat signatures until it was too late. The road had been mined hours earlier. The first explosion tore through the lead Humvee, sending shrapnel through the night. Screams filled the comms. The second blast hit the rear vehicle. Then chaos, pure, directionless chaos. Echo, this is Delta One. We're under heavy fire. Request immediate air support. She banked hard, pulling GS that blurred her vision. Copy, Delta One. I have eyes on you. Her hands moved instinctively. Switches, throttle, weapons live. Below, flashes of gunfire erupted from the tree line. She could have called for permission to engage. She could have waited for the clearance. But every second she waited, men were dying. She didn't wait. Echo engaging. Her jet dropped altitude. The targeting system locked on, but the smoke was too thick. The heat signatures were mixed. She fired. The explosion that followed silenced the gunfire and everything else. Target neutralized, she said. But there was no response. No one answered her call. Static. Then faintly, a broken voice. You hit the wrong grid, Echo. You hit us. The cockpit went cold, her breath caught. Say again. Friendly down. She couldn't breathe. Her eyes darted across the instruments, the coordinates blinking back at her like accusation. A 2-digit error, 2 digits, that was all it took. They pulled her from duty the next morning. The official report called it a tragic misfire. The investigation concluded she'd acted under pressure. The families were told it was an unavoidable accident. But she knew the truth. There were 8 names on that list. 8 people who trusted her eyes, her judgment, her precision. And she'd failed them. After that, the sky didn't look the same. She stopped flying, stopped talking. She requested reassignment to ground operations, lower profile, higher risk. Somewhere she could be useful without the hum of engines or the ghosts of radio silence. When the commanding officer asked her why, she said only, "Because I want to feel the ground again." That's how she ended up in black assignments, places without names, operations without records, missions that required people who didn't ask questions and didn't need sleep. Somewhere along the way, the call sign Echo disappeared. And in its place, someone called her Night Fox. The name stuck. Because she moved like one, silent, sharp, precise. Because she hunted through darkness, never leaving a trace. Because she didn't hesitate anymore. But behind that silence was the weight of 8 lives she could never unsee. On base, she never mentioned them. But the Admiral noticed. He'd seen that look before, the way her eyes went distant whenever someone joked about near misses or collateral. One evening, after the day's training had ended, he found her again by the shoreline, just as the sun was bleeding out behind the horizon. He walked up beside her, hands behind his back. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "You ever stop hearing it?" She turned her head slightly. "Hearing what, sir?" "The sound of what you couldn't fix." Her jaw tightened. "No, sir." He nodded slowly. "Good, you're not supposed to." She looked at him then, really looked, the lines of his face carved by years of command, the eyes of a man who'd seen too many folded flags. "Does it ever get lighter?" she asked quietly. "No," he said. "You just get stronger under the weight." The tide washed up against their boots. Neither moved. It wasn't comfort, it wasn't advice, it was truth, and sometimes that was enough. Weeks later, orders came down for another mission. Smaller team, classified objective. Her name was first on the list. As she reviewed the dossier, she noticed something strange: the coordinates, the region, the terrain. Her stomach turned cold. It was the same valley where she'd made the mistake years ago. Different objective, different time, same soil. She didn't tell anyone, not even the Admiral. When they lifted off that night, she sat in silence, staring through the open ramp of the aircraft, the moonlight flickering off the ridges below. The others talked, joked, checked their weapons. She said nothing. But inside her chest, something old and heavy stirred: memory and guilt, twined together like wire. The drop zone was quiet, too quiet. She could smell fuel and dust, could feel the way the earth still carried the ghosts of the last explosion years ago. The place hadn't healed. Neither had she. Their mission was to infiltrate and extract a defector carrying intel on chemical weapon stockpiles. Simple on paper, complicated in reality. Halfway through the advance, her comms cracked. "Fox 1, movement west." She signaled a halt, crouching low. The wind shifted, carrying faint voices. She recognized the accent, local militia. And then a sound she hadn't expected: laughter. Not far off. They were mocking someone. Through her scope she saw it, a figure tied to a post, beaten, barely alive. The defector. She motioned for her team to circle, suppress, rescue. The men prepared silently. But as she steadied her aim, she froze. The ground beneath her boot, the same rocky incline, the same shadow pattern. It was the spot, the exact grid she'd bombed years ago. She could still see the scorch marks under the moonlight. Her hands trembled for the first time in years. "Fox, we're waiting for your mark," someone whispered. She hesitated. In her mind she could hear it, that old radio transmission, broken, echoing through time. "You hit us." "Fox." She blinked, snapped back. "On my mark," she said. The firefight erupted. Muzzle flashes painted the trees in white and red. The team advanced fast, clean, practiced. Within minutes it was over. They reached the captive, breathing barely. She cut the ropes, lifted him to his feet. "Intel secured," she said into comms. The man looked up at her, dazed. "You came back," he whispered. She frowned. "What?" His eyes were glassy, unfocused. You were the one who dropped the fire, the angel of night. She froze. How do you? Because I was there, he said, voice trembling. You burned the road, you saved me. She stared at him, speechless. I was the driver of the third vehicle, he rasped. Everyone else, they didn't make it, but you stopped them. If you hadn't. He coughed, blood speckling his lips. Something in her chest cracked open. All these years she'd carried it like a crime, a sin, but he was saying something she'd never considered. That maybe the blast hadn't only destroyed. Maybe it had saved someone too. For the first time in years, her breath came out as a shudder, half relief, half disbelief. Fox extraction inbound, came the voice through comms. She nodded, lifting the wounded man's arm over her shoulder. But inside, something shifted. The silence she'd built around her guilt, it wasn't gone, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. Maybe that was what healing looked like. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, just breathing again. Back at base, after the debriefing, the Admiral found her outside again, staring at the horizon. He didn't speak for a while, then softly, rough mission. She exhaled, different kind of rough. He waited, patient as always. She finally turned to him. Sir, have you ever thought you were the villain? He smiled faintly, eyes on the dark water. Every time I give an order that costs a life. She nodded, the sea wind catching her hair. I thought I killed 8 good men, she said quietly, but tonight I learned I might have saved one. The Admiral looked at her, not surprised, not questioning, just proud. Then maybe it's time you stopped punishing yourself, he said. Her eyes stayed on the horizon. Punishment keeps me sharp, sir. He nodded slowly. Maybe, but so does peace. For a long time, neither said another word. The waves whispered against the rocks, carrying their silence between them. 2 soldiers who understood that some wars don't end when the gunfire stops. That night, for the first time since she'd earned the name Night Fox, she slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but without dreams that tore her awake. And that was enough. What happens when silence becomes your reputation? People stop asking questions and start giving you harder ones to answer. Weeks passed after the Valley mission. The world outside the base went on as usual. Headlines, noise, politics. But inside the classified corridors of Naval Command, one name kept appearing on the lips of men who spoke only in whispers. Night Fox. No rank, no file, no past, at least none they were cleared to see. And one morning, while the sun was still rising over the Pacific, a black SUV rolled through the gate. It stopped beside the hangar where she was calibrating her rifle, the same precision rifle she'd carried through jungles, through hell. 2 men stepped out. One wore the plain suit of a bureaucrat. The other carried the stillness of someone who didn't need to explain who he worked for. Lieutenant Reeve, the first one asked. She stood, lowering the weapon. Yes. He handed her a sealed folder. You're being transferred, immediate effect. To where? Joint Command, the second man said quietly. You'll be briefed en route. She glanced toward Admiral Hartwell, who was watching from across the tarmac. Their eyes met, and in that unspoken moment, he gave a single nod. Permission, respect, farewell. She climbed into the SUV without another word. The ride was long, winding through the hills until the coastline disappeared. The driver said nothing. Neither did she. The hum of the engine filled the silence between them like static. When the doors finally opened again, she was standing inside a facility she'd never seen before. White walls, soundproof glass, no insignia anywhere. The kind of place that didn't exist on any map. A woman waited for her inside a briefing room. Early 50s, calm eyes, posture straight as a rifle barrel. Commander Rains, she introduced herself. Strategic Operations Directorate. Night Fox didn't salute, just listened. Rains slid a dossier across the table. We're assembling an interagency task group. The mission is called Silent Veil. The file showed satellite photos, coastal ports, smuggling routes, the emblem of a private military company that had gone rogue, one that supplied weapons to both sides of wars that were never supposed to exist. "They're moving nerve agent precursors," Rains said. "We believe they've built a delivery system in a populated zone. We need eyes on the inside." Night Fox flipped through the images, shipping manifest, coordinates, faces blurred. "You want infiltration," she said. "Not just infiltration." Rains leaned forward. "We need someone who can lead the ground team without drawing attention, someone who knows how to disappear when the noise starts." "Why me?" "Because people follow silence," Rains said simply, "and because your record says you don't miss twice." For a long moment, Night Fox said nothing. Then, "When do we leave?" 3 days later, she was halfway across the world. The operation base was hidden in the outskirts of a broken coastal city, the kind of place where children played near rusted tanks and everyone pretended not to hear gunfire after dark. Her team was a mix of specialists: one British intel officer, 2 U.S. Marines, a French demolitions expert, and a local translator named Amir. They were strangers bound by trust that hadn't been tested yet. Their objective: track a shipment rumored to contain components for a binary chemical agent. "Rules are simple," Night Fox told them during the first briefing. "We move clean. No civilian contact, no unnecessary shots, and no egos. If I say quiet, you stay quiet." The Marine smirked. "You always talk like that, ma'am." She met his gaze. "Only when people need to listen." The smirk faded. For the next 48 hours, they worked the streets under cover of night, gathering intel. She walked among locals dressed in plain clothes, listening more than she spoke, watching gestures, reading fear. It was Amir who first noticed the pattern: trucks leaving the docks every second night, always with the same escort vehicles, always turning toward the old refinery district. "That's your hub," he said. By dawn, Night Fox had a plan. They would intercept one of the shipments, track it to its storage facility, and plan a beacon for a drone strike if needed. But operations like these are built on paper-thin luck, and luck, as always, came with a cost. The ambush began clean. They positioned themselves along the narrow road leading out of the docks, shadows blending into rust and concrete. At 300, headlights appeared, 2 armored jeeps leading a cargo truck. "Positions," Night Fox whispered. The first jeep passed, then the truck, then the second jeep. "Go." They moved fast, surgical. Spike strip deployed, tires shredded. Gunfire cracked the night open. Within seconds, the escorts were down, engines smoking. She climbed onto the truck, forcing the latch open, crates stacked in rows, sealed tight. Inside, chemical canisters, marked only with coded numbers. She exhaled slowly. "We found it." But before she could radio the beacon signal, a shot rang out from the hill. "Sniper, take cover." The Marines dove for the ditch. Bullets tore through metal. "Fox, we're pinned." She grabbed her scope, scanning the ridge. There, a glint of glass. 200 meters east slope," she murmured. She steadied her rifle against the truck frame, breathing in through her nose, out through her mouth. The world went narrow, one breath, one pull. The trigger broke. Silence followed. "Target down." But as the echo faded, she heard something else, a faint mechanical whine coming from beneath the truck. Her blood ran cold. "Everyone back now." The explosion lifted the world off its axis. Fire, dust, ringing in her ears. When the haze cleared, she was on the ground, vision blurred. One of the Marines was down. The rest scattered behind cover. The truck gone, burning wreckage spilling chemicals into the dirt. "Status," she rasped. "Pierce is hit. We need a vac." She pressed her hand to her bleeding arm, shrapnel again. Same shoulder. Same scar reopened. Not yet, she said. We can't leave the payload unsecured. Ma'am, we can't. Do it. Her voice cut through the chaos, not loud, but commanding in its steadiness. They moved, pulling what they could from the wreckage, planting charges to destroy what remained. By the time the second convoy arrived, the enemy's reinforcements, they were ghosts fatting into the alleys. Back at the safe house, the medic worked on Pierce's wound while the rest caught their breath. Amir sat across from her, eyes wide. You knew it was a trap. I suspected, she said. Then why go? Because suspicion isn't proof. He stared at her. You risked us all. She looked up slowly. We all volunteered. He wanted to argue, but couldn't. There was something in her tone, not arrogance, not cruelty, just the cold arithmetic of someone who'd buried enough friends to know that feelings never outrun reality. Later, when the others slept, she stepped outside onto the balcony. The city below was still, no sirens, no dogs, just the hum of distant generators and the smell of salt carried in from the sea. She pressed a gauze pad against her wound and watched the horizon until the first hint of dawn painted the rooftops red. And for a moment she thought of the admiral of his words, maybe peace keeps you sharp too. She almost smiled, almost. 2 nights later, new intel came in from the French demolitions expert, Roux. The real stockpile isn't here, he said, laying photos on the table. It's on a cargo freighter anchored 5 miles offshore. They're moving at dawn. Night Fox leaned over the maps. How many on board? At least 20 guards, maybe more. Evac. Roux shrugged. No naval support cleared, it's just us. She nodded, then we swim. They stared at her, half in disbelief, half in admiration. And before anyone could object, she was already stripping her gear down to essentials: waterproof case, sidearm, suppressed rifle wrapped for salt protection. Amir hesitated. You really think we'll make it back? Her answer was simple. We're not the ones who need to. They entered the water just after midnight, 4 black silhouettes sliding beneath the surface. The current was strong, the cold numbing. Each stroke pushed them closer to the freighter's looming shadow against the stars. She reached the hull first, attaching a magnetic line. One by one they climbed. On deck the guards smoked cigarettes, laughing softly, unaware. Night Fox gave a single-hand signal. What happened next was fast, quiet takedowns, knives against throats, bodies lowered without sound. Within minutes the deck was theirs. They moved below into the hold, crates stacked to the ceiling, stenciled with the same code marks as before. She placed the charges, methodical. 1, 2, 3, then a whisper in her earpiece. Movement upper deck. She turned, the door slammed open. A man stepped in, tall, clean suit under a tactical vest. Not a guard, a leader. So this is the famous ghost, he said. His accent was faintly European. Night Fox, yes. Her grip tightened on the rifle. Who told you that name? He smiled. Everyone, you're a legend in the places we buy silence. Behind him, more men appeared, rifles raised. You could have been rich, he said. Instead you serve ghosts who'll forget you. Her eyes didn't move. Maybe. Then why fight, he asked. She paused, because someone has to. Then she triggered the remote. The explosion ripped through the hull. Water rushed in like judgment. She ran, sprinting down corridors as alarms blared. Her team followed, lungs burning. They dove into the black water just as the freighter began to list, fire consuming the deck above. The blast lit the sea like daylight for one brief, violent moment. Then darkness swallowed it whole. Hours later, they crawled onto the rocky shore, soaked, bruised, alive. Roux lay back, laughing breathlessly. Mon Dieu, you are insane. Night Fox looked out toward the burning wreck far offshore, the flames shrinking against the horizon. Insane, she murmured, maybe just tired. Amir turned to her. Do you ever regret it, any of this? She thought for a long moment. Regret keeps you human, she said finally, but silence keeps you sane. No one spoke after that. The sea hissed below them, washing the blood and salt from their skin, and in that strange half-light of dawn, they looked less like soldiers and more like survivors learning to breathe again. Back at command, the official report would call it a contained maritime incident. The names of her team would never appear. The photos would be sealed, the footage erased. But for those who were there, one thing remained unspoken yet certain. When Night Fox gave the order, the world listened. Because her silence wasn't emptiness. It was purpose. And purpose, in a world drowning in noise, can sound a lot like power. How do you stay loyal when loyalty starts to feel like silence in the wrong direction? 2 weeks after the Silent Veil operation, the official world pretended nothing had happened. The sea swallowed the freighter, the files were stamped classified, and the news spoke about storms off a foreign coast. But in the quiet rooms of command, there was noise, the kind that comes from men afraid of truth. Admiral Hartwell felt it first. A summons to Washington, closed doors, cold eyes, questions that weren't really questions. He left that meeting with a tight jaw and a single order sealed in his hand. Night Fox to be held in debrief until further notice. He knew what that meant. They weren't congratulating her, they were containing her. When she walked into the secure facility, she didn't resist the guards. She didn't ask why. She simply handed over her gear, rifle, sidearm, tags, and sat down in the interrogation room. The walls were pale, the light too bright, the kind of room designed to make you feel guilty for breathing. A man entered, clean-cut, no insignia. He placed a folder on the table. "Lieutenant Reeve," he began, though the tone carried no respect. "You disobeyed direct protocol during Operation Silent Veil. You detonated charges without command confirmation, resulting in international casualties. Care to explain?" She looked at him, not defiant, not apologetic, just still. "Explain what, sir? The ship or the silence that followed?" His jaw tightened. "You went off mission." "I completed it." "That ship contained non-combatants." "Then your intel was wrong." He leaned forward. "Are you questioning Joint Command?" Her gaze didn't move. "I'm questioning why you're afraid of what I found." The man closed the folder slowly. "That's enough." He left without another word. Hours later, Admiral Hartwell arrived. She looked up as he entered, the first familiar face since she'd been brought in. "Sir," she said quietly. "Do sir me right now," he replied. His voice was softer than usual, but it carried the weariness of someone fighting a battle behind closed doors. "They're saying you compromised an operation worth billions in covert assets." She blinked once. "Assets?" He met her eyes. The company behind those weapons, half of it was government-funded through shell contracts. Her expression didn't change, but something in her chest went cold. "So we were cleaning up our own mess." "Something like that." Silence stretched between them. Finally she said, "Then why send me at all?" Hartwell exhaled. "Because someone needed to make sure it didn't get worse, and someone needed to take the blame when it did." The words hit harder than any bullet. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "And you knew?" "I suspected," he said, "but suspicion isn't proof." Her mouth curved, the faintest trace of irony. "That's what I told myself once." He looked at her, the soldier he'd trained, the ghost he'd learned to respect. "They want you benched, quiet, out of sight for a while." "And you?" "I want you alive." That night she sat alone in the holding cell, the hum of fluorescent lights above her like distant static. She thought about all the missions she'd done, the faces she'd saved, the lives she'd ended, the names she'd never learn. And she wondered, when had service turned into survival? When had silence stopped meaning discipline, and started meaning complicity. The door clicked open. A woman stepped in, Commander Rains, the one who had recruited her. "Get up," Rains said. Night Fox rose. "They're releasing you, but it's conditional." "Conditional on what?" Rains handed her a new folder. "You'll lead one more operation, off the record. No paperwork, no witnesses. After that, retirement, honorable discharge, full benefits." Night Fox studied her. "And if I refuse?" Rain's eyes hardened. "Then this room becomes permanent." She opened the folder. Inside, satellite imagery of a compound in Eastern Europe. A name she recognized immediately: Arden Holdings, one of the shell companies that funded the very network she'd just destroyed. So this was it, the final cleanup. "You want me to bury the trail," she said quietly. Rains didn't deny it. "You do this and the noise dies forever." Night Fox closed the file. "Noise doesn't die," she said. "It just waits for silence." 2 weeks later, she was wheels up in a cargo plane with a skeleton crew. No insignia, no patch, just faces too tired to care who they worked for anymore. The plan was simple on paper: infiltrate the compound, seize data drives, erase the facility. No survivors. But simplicity in war is another word for ignorance. They parachuted in before dawn, landing in snow that swallowed sound. The air burned cold in their lungs. Through her scope, she watched the compound lights flicker in the distance. Guards patrolled with dogs, trucks idling in the yard. "Positions," she whispered. They moved slow, precise, efficient. Inside the outer fence, everything looked too easy. And that's when instinct screamed. "Stop!" The men froze. She knelt, brushing snow aside, a buried sensor barely visible, a trip detonation line. "Booby-trapped," she said. "They knew we were coming." No sooner had the words left her mouth than flares shot into the air. Gunfire erupted. Ambush, fall back. The forest lit up like day. Bullets chewed bark and snow. Her team scattered behind cover. Fox were pinned. "Hold position." She returned fire, dropping 2 silhouettes in the tree line. Through the chaos, a radio crackled on her earpiece, a voice she recognized instantly. "You should have stayed silent, Fox." Her blood ran cold. "Rains." The voice laughed softly. "You were never supposed to make it back." For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that sound, betrayal given a name. "Why?" she whispered. "Because ghosts don't get pensions." Static swallowed the rest. She didn't have time to process it. One of her men went down, hit in the chest. Another screamed for a medic. "Smoke now." They threw grenades, fog swallowing the clearing. She dragged the wounded behind a fallen tree, her hands slick with blood and snow. The air stank of gunpowder and betrayal. When the smoke thinned, she made her choice. "Evac route Charlie," she ordered. "Move west." "But the mission is dead," she said flatly. "We're not dying for their secrets." They moved through the forest, bleeding, limping, but alive. At the ridge, she turned back. The compound was burning, not from their doing, but from something else. Self-destruct, remote detonation, cleanup protocol. They planned it all. Her team looked to her, waiting for answers. She gave none. Only the order, "Keep moving." 3 days later, they reached the border. Of the 7 who dropped, only 4 crossed the line. A helicopter waited unmarked, cold metal against a gray sky. As they lifted off, one of the men looked at her, voice hoarse. "What now?" She didn't answer. She just watched the burning horizon fade into cloud. Below them, snow buried every trace of what had happened, as if the world itself wanted to forget. Back at an undisclosed base, she walked straight past the debriefing officers and into Hartwell's office. He looked older, heavier somehow, like the weight of command had finally begun to crush the man beneath the metals. "They tried to erase us," she said. I know. How long? He met her eyes, long enough. The anger that had been simmering under her calm broke through, not as shouting, but as tremor in her voice. They used us, sir, all of us, and when it got dirty enough they buried it under silence, my silence. Hartwell didn't flinch. You think I don't know that? Then why stay? He stared at his hands. Because someone has to guard the truth until people are ready to hear it. Her voice dropped. That's not guarding, that's prison. He looked up then, eyes wet with something between pride and sorrow. Maybe, but someone has to keep the light on for the next generation, so they don't walk blind into the same dark. She wanted to argue, she didn't. Because she saw in him what she feared in herself. A person who had traded peace for purpose so long ago, they no longer knew the difference. That night she packed her duffel. No farewell ceremony, no salute, just the whisper of zippers and the sound of boots on concrete. Before dawn, she left a single envelope on Hartwell's desk. He found it hours later, inside a single line. Sir, you were right. Silence has power, but truth has peace. And beneath it, her insignia. She was gone. For months, no one saw her. But the world she left behind began to tremble, leaked documents, anonymous drops, hidden footage from a sinking freighter. Someone was speaking. Not loudly, not publicly, just enough to make the powerful afraid again. And in back rooms where officials whispered, they asked the same question again and again. Who's doing this? The answer came as a rumor. A woman. Codename Night Fox. A ghost who broke her own silence, not for revenge but for truth. In the end, Hartwell would read the headlines and know. He'd smile faintly, the kind of smile only tired men carry. Because he finally understood. She hadn't gone rogue, she'd gone right. And sometimes, righteousness looks a lot like disobedience. How long can a ghost stay hidden once she starts whispering the truth? It began with one file. Then another. Encrypted data pulled from the wreck of Silent Vale and sent to the world, piece by piece. Within a month, governments were denying everything. Within 2, they were hunting her. She had become what every system fears most, proof. The first leak surfaced on a foreign journalist's laptop, documents detailing the black funding networks behind Arden Holdings. The second revealed casualty lists scrubbed from official archives. And the third, her final message before disappearing again, contained a single line of text. Silence isn't loyalty when it hides the wound. The media called her a traitor. The soldiers who'd served beside her called her a legend. Somewhere between those 2 words lived the truth. She moved constantly. Morocco, Cyprus, Iceland, names on passports that changed every 3 weeks. In Tangier, she rented a room above a cafe that smelled of cardamom and sea salt. At night, she sat by the window, listening to the harbor winds and the soft buzz of shortwave radios, scanning frequencies for voices that might be coming for her. She didn't want fame. She wanted balance, the kind that comes when lies finally weigh the same as truth. But the world didn't deal in balance. It dealt in control. The agency came for her first. 2 operatives, civilian clothes, polite smiles. Ms. Reeve, one said as she poured coffee, we'd like to talk. She didn't look up. If you're here to arrest me, just say it. We're not here to arrest you. We're here to offer you protection. From what? He hesitated. From the people you embarrassed. She met his eyes, calm, unreadable. They're your people. Neither argued. They didn't have to. When they left, she closed the door, locked it, and within an hour was gone. Another flight, another name. By spring she was in the north, a cabin near the Arctic line. Endless daylight, endless isolation. The cold kept the satellites blind and her mind quieter than it had been in years. But solitude doesn't erase conscience, it amplifies it. Sometimes, when the wind howled across the ice, she heard echoes of the men she'd lost, the ones she'd bombed by mistake, the ones she couldn't save at the compound, the ones buried under the operations she'd just exposed. They didn't accuse her anymore. They reminded her why she couldn't stop. One morning, a coded message appeared on the old encrypted drive she kept offline. Source unknown. It contained coordinates and 4 words. He's in danger, Hartwell. Her pulse froze. Admiral Hartwell, the only man who had ever treated her silence with respect, was still on active reserve, still speaking in rooms he shouldn't. And now, someone wanted to silence him too. She packed within minutes. A plane to London, a train to Edinburgh, a cargo ship east. No electronics, no trace. By the time she reached the rendezvous point, a safe house buried in fog and forest, she was exhausted, bleeding from an old wound reopened by travel. But fatigue never stopped her before. Inside, a single lamp glowed. And sitting beneath it, older, thinner but unmistakable, was Hartwell. He smiled when he saw her. I should have known you'd find me. I followed the warning, she said. He poured tea into chipped cups. They're coming for both of us now. You know that, don't you? She nodded. Do you regret it? He asked. No, she said, but I didn't expect it to spread this far. It always spreads, he murmured. Truth is like water. You can dam it, but you can't dry it. He leaned forward. They've twisted your leaks into propaganda. You're the villain now in half the world's headlines. I was the villain years ago, she said softly. This time it matters. He studied her face, the scars, the calm that bordered on sorrow. You could still disappear, start over. She looked at him, eyes steady. Start over as what? A woman who knows too much and does nothing. He chuckled faintly. I forgot you don't do nothing. Outside, the wind rose. The forest shifted, whispering like static. Hartwell's smile faded. They'll trace you here soon, when they do. I'll handle it. I know, he said, but promise me something. What? When this is over, speak. Not for them, for yourself. Her lips parted, then closed again. She wanted to promise. She couldn't. They found the cabin 3 nights later. It started with the low thump of rotor blades, then the faint shimmer of laser dots dancing across the walls. Hartwell looked at her. Go. I'm not leaving you. This is my fight now, he said. Yours is to survive it. She shook her head. They'll kill you. He smiled sadly. I've lived long enough to know the difference between dying in silence and dying for meaning. Before she could argue, he pressed something into her hand. A small data key, worn, scratched. All the evidence, everything left, take it. Come with me. I'll slow you down. Sir. He cut her off with the same command tone he'd used years before. That's an order, Night Fox. For a moment the old discipline returned, the reflex of obedience. She hated it and loved it. She slipped out the back window into the frozen dark as floodlights washed the trees. Seconds later, gunfire erupted. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She ran until dawn, the key clutched in her glove. The horizon bled pink behind the pines. Her breath came in clouds. Her body shook from exhaustion and loss. When she finally stopped, miles away, she turned toward the distant sound of helicopters retreating. Smoke rose faintly through the morning fog. She whispered one word into the cold, rest. And for the first time, her voice cracked. By the time she reached civilization again, the news had broken. Admiral Hartwell, killed in accidental cabin fire. She watched the broadcast from a hotel lobby, face expressionless, hands trembling under the table. A reporter said he died alone. She knew better. He died covering her escape. She left the building before anyone noticed the tear that slid down her cheek. From then on, Night Fox was no longer hiding for herself. She was carrying him. The drive he'd given her contained enough evidence to shake governments, but releasing it would mean chaos, names, operations, nations exposed. She wrestled with it every night. Hartwell had believed in controlled truth. She believed in full light. And somewhere between those beliefs lay the thin line between justice and destruction. She stared at the drive one evening in an abandoned airfield hangar, her reflection flickering in the cold metal. "What would you do, sir?" she whispered. The wind answered with silence. The next morning she made her choice. She uploaded a single file, just one, not to the press, not to a government, but to a public, open-source archive. A mission transcript from years ago. Her mission, the one that had haunted her since the day she'd pressed the wrong coordinates. She signed it Echo. It went viral within hours. People read her confession and saw not a traitor, but a soldier admitting humanity inside a machine that demanded perfection. And for the first time she saw what Hartwell meant. When truth is spoken with humility, it doesn't destroy, it heals. The agencies hunting her realized it too late. They sent teams across continents, but the world had already chosen a side. Protests flared. Journalists demanded transparency. Soldiers sent her coded messages of gratitude. One line kept appearing on walls, on forums, on letters slipped under embassy doors. "For those who fight in the dark, so others can sleep in the light." The same words she once engraved on a coin for Hartwell. He had kept it, now the world did too. Weeks later, in a small port somewhere near the Baltic, a fisherman swore he saw a woman boarding a rust-streaked cargo vessel. Short hair, calm eyes, a silver coin in her palm. She handed the captain a slip of paper, coordinates in the far north, and said only, "Keep the lights off after midnight." He remembered her silence more than her face. By the time dawn came, the ship was gone, swallowed by mist. No one knows where she went after that. Some say she joined a humanitarian outfit working under false names in war zones. Others claim she vanished into the Arctic again, guarding something no one dares name. But those who understand how legends work know this much. Night Fox didn't disappear to hide. She disappeared to finish what truth started. Because some wars don't end, they just move underground. And sometimes, the loudest act of courage isn't the one shouted into microphones. It's the one carried out by someone who once chose silence and learned what it truly meant. Somewhere under a sky streaked with northern light, she sits by a dying fire. The wind moves through the pines like breath. She holds the coin, turning it between her fingers, the engraving worn smooth by time. Then softly she speaks to the night. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The fire crackles once, then fades. And the darkness feels safe again. Because she's still out there. Watching. Listening. Making sure the world stays quiet enough for truth to be heard. How does a ghost start a movement? Not with noise. With silence that people can finally hear. Months had passed since her last message. The world still argued about her, hero, traitor, myth. Politicians debated her name in cold rooms while soldiers whispered it like prayer in the field. The leaks had slowed, but the effects hadn't. Something had changed inside the ranks. Men and women who once followed orders without question began reading between the lines. Instructors in training camps spoke of moral clarity like it mattered again. Quietly, recruits shared encrypted files, not for rebellion, but for understanding. And somewhere, far from any command post, her story had become something new. A reminder that truth doesn't need rank to stand. At Coronado, the old base was quieter now. The sea still carried its salt and wind, but the laughter that once filled the barracks had softened into something almost reverent. New cadets ran drills under the same sunrise she once faced, and in the mess hall, someone had scratched a line into the metal beam above the entry door. "Earn your silence." No one admitted to doing it. No one removed it either. Admiral Hartwell's old office remained sealed since his death, but his replacement, a younger officer named Captain Elias Ward, sometimes stood at the window where Hartwell used to watch the horizon. He never met Night Fox, but her file, what little of it wasn't redacted, had shaped him. Every decision he made, every order he signed, he weighed against her ghost. One evening, during a late briefing, a young SEAL named Morales asked a question that silenced the room. "Sir, why do we train to follow orders faster than we train to question them?" Ward looked up. The question wasn't insubordination, it was sincerity. He didn't answer right away. "Because it's easier," he said finally. "Easier to move than to think, easier to obey than to believe." The room stayed quiet. Then Morales added softly, "Night Fox didn't just obey." Someone else muttered, "Yeah, and they called her a traitor." Ward's gaze hardened. "They called her that because she scared them." The young man blinked. "Scared who?" "The kind of people who confuse silence with obedience." No one spoke after that. Later that night, after everyone had left, Ward went to the shoreline. The moonlight stretched across the waves, the same rhythm she once watched alone. He knelt, picked up a piece of driftwood, and carved into the sand a single fox silhouette. Then quietly he said to the wind, "We still hear you." He didn't expect an answer, but somehow the sea seemed calmer. Meanwhile, across the world, Night Fox had become more than a ghost. Somewhere in Eastern Europe, a journalist named Lena Davorak was piecing together fragments of leaked files. Every document led to one phrase: Operation Knox 17. Buried under false operations and black-budget projects, she found the same signature across all the final approvals: Rains, C. Commander Rains, the woman who had sent Night Fox into the trap. The journalist hesitated to publish. Doing so could get her killed, but the truth was like a wire humming under her skin. It wouldn't stop. So she wrote. And when the story dropped, it broke the silence wide open. The exposé hit like a controlled detonation. Headlines: Government contractor exposed in covert bioweapon scandal. Evidence links senior officials to rogue black ops program. The world reeled. Arrests followed. And somewhere, hidden behind anonymous servers, a message appeared on the same encrypted channels Night Fox had once used. Truth doesn't kill nations, lies do. No signature, just a fox icon. In an underground bunker, Commander Rains read the news with trembling hands. The room was filled with the glow of monitors, feeds, footage, files she thought she'd buried forever. "Who's feeding this?" a general demanded over the line. Rains swallowed. "It's her, it has to be. She's supposed to be dead." Rains looked at the flickering screen where the fox icon blinked again. "Some things don't die, sir. They evolve." Half a world away, Night Fox stood at the edge of a frozen lake, watching the aurora split the sky into green fire. Her breath curled in the cold. The wind carried voices from a radio someone had left running in a distant outpost. Soldiers discussing the leaks, laughing softly, arguing, reflecting. She closed her eyes. Once she had wanted to be unseen. Now she realized invisibility had become her power. She didn't need to shout anymore. Others were speaking for her. And that was enough. Back at Coronado, training had changed. The instructors called it ethical engagement theory, a fancy title for something simple. Before every operation, recruits had to answer one question. If no one ever knows what you did, will you still be proud of it? It was Hartwell's question. It was hers. And it began to spread like wildfire, whispered in debriefings, scribbled in notebooks, printed on morale posters that mysteriously appeared without authorization. The brass tried to suppress it. But you can't suppress conscience. It grows in silence. Months later, Captain Ward received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a small coin, silver, smooth, engraved with a fox and 6 words. For those who remember quietly. He stared at it for a long time, then smiled. She was alive. He didn't report it. He just put the coin on his desk beside Hartwell's old nameplate and whispered, "Good hunting, ma'am." But for all the hope her legend inspired, the danger hadn't vanished. Commander Rains had gone dark, no trace, no transmissions. The last known satellite ping placed her somewhere in the Balkans. Night Fox knew what that meant. Loose ends were tightening. She checked her weapon, strapped on her old gear, and whispered to the snow, "One more shadow, then I rest." She left before dawn, vanishing into the white silence. The confrontation wasn't cinematic. No explosions, no gunfights, just 2 women in a ruined chapel half buried under snow. Rain stood near the altar, her breath forming clouds. "You cost me everything," she said. "You cost everyone else more," Night Fox replied. "They'll come for you too." They already did. Rain's hands shook as she raised her pistol. "You think truth saves anyone. It only replaces one lie with another." Night Fox didn't move. "Maybe, but I'd rather live in a broken truth than a perfect lie." For a long second, the world held its breath. Then Rains lowered the gun. "I was wrong about you," she said softly. Night Fox stepped closer. "No, you were right. I don't follow orders anymore." The wind roared through the shattered windows, carrying snow between them. When it cleared, Rains was gone. Whether she fled or fell, no one ever found her body. Night Fox left the chapel without looking back. As she descended the mountain, she heard faint thunder in the distance, not weather but aircraft, the kind she used to fly. She stopped, looked up at the sky, and whispered, "Echo out." Somewhere above, the clouds parted and light broke through. Weeks later, her coin began appearing everywhere, not just among soldiers but civilians, doctors, teachers, reporters, people who had nothing to do with war but everything to do with courage. They called it the Fox Creed. It wasn't an organization. It wasn't rebellion. It was a quiet promise. We do what's right, even unseen. Simple words, dangerous ones. And as governments tried to erase her, they realized something terrible. You can erase a person. You can't erase an idea that teaches people to think. In an archived interview, years later, Captain Ward would say, "She didn't lead a revolution. She reminded us what the word duty actually meant." He would look out at the Pacific and add softly, "And she did it without ever raising her voice." That was the power of Night Fox. Not her skill, not her legend. Her silence. A silence that had once felt like punishment. Now it was the world's moral echo, the quiet after chaos that makes people reflect instead of react. Because sometimes, all it takes is one calm voice refusing to lie, and 1,000 others finally listening. How do legends end? They don't. They fade into the people who remember why they mattered. Years had passed since anyone had seen her face. No photographs, no signals, no trace on the grid. And yet she was everywhere. In every whisper of conscience before a trigger was pulled. In every quiet decision that chose mercy over victory. In every recruit who paused long enough to ask why. They still called her Night Fox, not out of fear but out of gratitude. The world had changed. Governments rewrote their doctrines. Operations now required a human review, a safeguard that bore no official name but carried her spirit. And in small corners of the world where peace was measured in nights without gunfire, silver coins were passed from one soldier to another. Each one engraved with a fox. Each one a reminder. For those who fight in the dark, so others can sleep in the light. No one printed them. They simply appeared, left on memorial stones, base gates, hospital nightstands. a currency of respect traded in silence. At Coronado, the new recruits learned her story differently. Not as myth, not as warning, as lesson. They studied her missions, her choices, her refusals. And on the first day of every training cycle, Captain Elias Ward stood before them and asked a question she once lived by. If no one ever knows what you did, will you still be proud of it? The room always went still. No one wanted to answer too quickly. Because the point wasn't to speak. It was to think. But the story didn't end at Coronado. It stretched far beyond. Somewhere in a refugee corridor in the Middle East, a convoy carrying food and medicine rolled through territory still scarred by old wars. The leader of the convoy, a woman with gray streaks in her short hair and eyes like weathered steel, walked the line between vehicles. No insignia, no name tag. When the local militia tried to stop them, she stepped forward calmly. Her voice was quiet, measured. "People are hungry," she said. "Let us through." They hesitated. Something about her presence unsettled them, not the threat of violence but the absence of fear. Minutes later, they moved aside. The trucks rolled on. Children waved as the convoy passed, dust rising behind them like ghosts finally leaving. And when someone asked the woman her name, she smiled faintly and said, "Names aren't what matter." But a driver later noticed the small silver coin she kept tucked beside the radio. "A fox." He didn't ask again. Back home, years later, a memorial was unveiled on the base. Not for her officially, she never existed, but for all those who fought without credit. The plaque read, "In honor of those who kept their vows when no one was watching." Captain Ward stood beside it during the ceremony, uniform pressed, hair graying at the temples. When the cameras left, he reached into his pocket and placed his coin at the foot of the stone. Then he whispered, "She'd hate this ceremony." The Admiral's old aide smiled. "Yeah, but she'd like the silence." That night, Ward returned to his quarters overlooking the ocean. The base was quiet. Only the hum of distant waves and the steady beat of his heart. He poured a drink, sat by the window, and looked out toward the horizon. The same horizon Hartwell once watched, the same one she had stared at all those nights ago. He thought about how it had all started. A joke, a call sign, a room full of laughter that ended in respect. He smiled faintly. "Run with the wolves," Hartwell had said. But she hadn't. She'd run alone and somehow led the pack anyway. He raised the glass to the dark and murmured, "To the one who never needed a spotlight." Outside, the wind shifted, and the lights along the pier flickered once. Thousands of miles away, in a frozen village where auroras painted the sky green, a small school stood at the edge of the tundra. Inside, a teacher told her students stories of courage. Not about kings or conquerors, about quiet people. "Sometimes," she said, "bravery doesn't shout, it listens." A little girl raised her hand. "Like the lady in the stories." The teacher smiled. "Yes, like her." The child frowned thoughtfully. Did she win? The teacher paused, glancing at the photograph pinned on the wall. A silhouette against the sea, no name, just a fox carved into the frame. "She didn't have to," the teacher said softly. "She changed what winning means." That night under the northern lights, the same woman who once answered to Night Fox stood alone outside the schoolhouse, watching her students through the frosted glass. Her hair had turned silver, her body carried old scars, but her eyes, still that same calm silver, reflecting the fire of the sky, had not dimmed. One of the children looked up and waved. She smiled just slightly and waved back. Then she turned toward the horizon, where the light of a distant storm rippled through the clouds. She whispered to the wind, "Still here, sir." And if the world had been quiet enough, it might have heard a faint echo in reply, a voice she hadn't heard in years, carried by memory itself. Get her home. As dawn broke, she walked down to the frozen shore. The ice cracked softly beneath her boots. She stopped where the sea began to thaw, kneeling to scoop a handful of snow that melted in her palm. Life always found its way back. Even after fire. Even after silence. She took the coin from her pocket, kissed its edge, and placed it in the snow. Then she whispered a final line, the one she'd lived by, the one she'd earned. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. The wind caught the words and carried them out across the water, where they disappeared into light. Years later, when a survey team found the coin half buried in the ice, they turned it over and saw the engraving. They didn't know what it meant. They just pocketed it, carried it home, and left it on a windowsill where sunlight touched it every morning. And somewhere far beyond names or ranks, that small reflection became what legends are meant to be, a reminder, not of war, but of grace under fire. Because in the end, Night Fox was never about orders or medals. She was about choice. The choice to stay calm when shouted at. To do right when unseen. To walk away when applause felt wrong. The choice to keep faith in a world that kept breaking it. So if you ever find yourself near an ocean at night, and the wind falls still for just a heartbeat, listen closely. You might hear it, that soft echo through the waves. The rhythm of footsteps that don't quite fade. It's not a ghost. It's a promise. That silence still commands the world. And that courage, real courage, still moves quietly among us. Because legends don't end in fire. They end in peace. And peace, sometimes, wears the face of a woman who learned that silence was never weakness. It was strength in its purest form.